The moment Rex heard Jake's voice calling his name across the Colorado farmyard, the 8-year-old German Shepherd went completely still. Then his ears perked up, his head tilted, and he began moving toward a sound he'd been waiting 5 years to hear again. This is the story of how a military working dog and his handler found their way back to each other. The farmhouse sat on 40 acres of rolling hills outside Colorado Springs, surrounded by the kind of peaceful landscape that seemed designed to help old soldiers, both human and canine, find peace after years of service. Harold and Betty Thompson had been providing foster care for retired military working dogs for over a decade, understanding that these highly trained animals needed special care as they transitioned from active duty to civilian life. Rex had been living with them for 18 months, and while he'd adapted well to farm life, there was something in his demeanor that suggested he was still waiting for something. Maybe someone. 3,000 miles away in San Antonio, Texas, Staff Sergeant Jake Martinez was beginning another weekend of searching. At 36, Jake carried the physical reminders of 3 tours in Afghanistan. A slight limp from shrapnel in his left leg, scars on his arms from the IED explosion that had ended his military career, and the kind of hypervigilance that made civilian life a constant adjustment. But none of those challenges compared to the emotional weight of losing Rex. For 3 years in Iraq, Jake and Rex had been inseparable. They'd worked bomb detection in some of the most dangerous areas of Anbar province, where Rex's ability to detect explosives had saved countless lives. Rex wasn't just Jake's working partner. He was his closest friend, his emotional anchor, and the reason Jake had maintained his sanity during the darkest moments of war. The bond between military working dogs and their handlers is unlike any other relationship in the armed forces. These dogs live with their handlers, work with them daily, and share dangers that would break most civilian animals. They communicate through gestures, tones, and an intuitive understanding that develops over months of life-or-death situations. Jake and Rex had that bond. Rex had detected the IED that nearly killed them both on March 15, 2019. He'd alerted Jake to the explosive device, but before they could clear the area, a second, undetected bomb had detonated. Jake had been evacuated to Germany for medical treatment, while Rex, who had been injured but not as severely, remained in Iraq to recover and continue working with a new handler. That was the last time Jake had seen him. Military bureaucracy had made it nearly impossible for Jake to track Rex's whereabouts. Working dogs were considered equipment rather than companions, and their assignments were handled through channels that didn't prioritize keeping former partners connected. Jake's requests for information about Rex's status were met with form letters and assurances that Rex was continuing his service with distinction. But Jake needed more than bureaucratic reassurances. He needed to know that Rex was safe, healthy, and eventually, when the dog's service ended, he needed to bring him home. The search had consumed Jake's life for 5 years. Every weekend, he drove to different military installations, veterinary clinics, and animal shelters, carrying photos of Rex and hoping someone would recognize the distinctive markings on the German Shepherd's face. He'd created social media accounts dedicated to finding Rex, posted on military forums, and connected with networks of veterans who understood the importance of military working dog reunions. The hashtag #FindRex hashtag had been shared thousands of times, generating leads that Jake followed across the country. Most led nowhere, cases of mistaken identity, well-meaning tips about dogs that looked similar to Rex, or dead ends where military records had been classified or lost. Jake's persistence was driven by more than sentiment. Rex had saved his life multiple times, and Jake felt a moral obligation to ensure that Rex's post-service life was as good as the dog deserved. But beyond that, Jake knew that finding Rex was essential to his own healing. The bond they'd shared in Iraq represented a connection and purpose that Jake hadn't been able to replicate in civilian life. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, a retired military veterinarian who had treated Rex during his final deployment. Dr. Gonzalez had seen one of Jake's social media posts and recognized not just Rex's photograph, but also Jake's name from medical records she'd reviewed years earlier. "I remember you both," Dr. Gonzalez said during their phone conversation. Rex was brought to our clinic after the IED incident. He had some injuries, but he recovered well. After that, he was transferred to a different unit for 6 months before being retired due to age and accumulated stress from deployment. She paused before delivering the information Jake had been hoping to hear for 5 years. I kept in touch with the retirement coordinator because Rex was one of the most exceptional working dogs I treated. He was adopted by a family in Colorado, the Thompsons. They specialize in caring for retired military dogs. Jake's hands were shaking as he wrote down the contact information. Harold Thompson answered the phone on the second ring. And when Jake explained who he was and why he was calling, the older man's voice immediately warmed with understanding. "Rex," Harold said. "Yes, he's been with us for 1.5 years now. Beautiful dog, incredibly well-trained, but there's always been something. He seems like he's waiting for someone. Are you that someone?" The conversation that followed established that Rex was healthy, well cared for, and available for adoption by his former handler. The Thompsons, who had fostered dozens of military working dogs, understood the importance of reuniting dogs with their handlers whenever possible. "We've just been keeping him safe until you could find him," Betty Thompson said when she joined the conversation. "He's a wonderful dog, but we always hoped his original handler would come looking for him." Jake made the 1,200-mile drive to Colorado in one day, stopping only for gas and food, driven by an urgency that had been building for 5 years. The Thompsons had offered to meet him anywhere convenient, but Jake wanted to see Rex in the environment where he'd been living to understand how the dog had been spending his retirement. Room to run and caring people who understood military animals. Harold and Betty met Jake at the front gate, both of them clearly moved by the reunion they were about to facilitate. "He's in the back pasture," Harold said. "We told him this morning that someone special was coming to see him. Dogs understand more than people give them credit for." As they walked around the house, toward the open field behind the property, Jake felt his heart racing with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Part hope, part fear, part gratitude that this moment was finally happening. Rex was lying in the shade of an oak tree, alert and observant in the way that military working dogs never quite lose, even in retirement. He was grayer around the muzzle than Jake remembered, and there was a deliberateness to his movements that suggested the accumulated wear of years of service. But he was unmistakably the same dog who had shared a bunk with Jake in Afghanistan. Jake stopped about 50 feet away, not wanting to overwhelm Rex or force a recognition that might not come. 5 years was a long time in dog years, and there was always the possibility that Rex's memory of their partnership had faded. "Rex," Jake called, using the same tone he'd used during their years of service together. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Rex's head snapped up, his ears perked forward, and his entire body went into the alert posture that Jake remembered from their working days. For a moment, the dog was completely still, processing the sound that had just cut through 5 years of waiting. Then Rex began to move, not running, but walking with the purposeful gait of a dog who had recognized something important. His tail wasn't wagging yet. Rex had always been a serious, focused dog, but there was something in his movement that suggested he was remembering. Jake knelt down and extended his hand, using a gesture that had been part of their daily routine in Afghanistan. "Come here, boy. Do you remember me?" Rex approached cautiously, then with increasing confidence. When he was close enough, he began to sniff Jake's hand, then his sleeve, then his face. And then something clicked, some combination of scent and voice and gesture that triggered a memory 5 years in the making. Rex's tail began to wag, slowly at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. He pressed against Jake, then sat in the precise position he'd been trained to take when greeting his handler. It was a behavior so specific to their partnership that there was no doubt. Rex remembered. "Good boy," Jake said, his voice breaking as he wrapped his arms around the dog who had shared the most dangerous and meaningful years of his life in Iraq. "I've been looking for you for so long." For several minutes, they simply stayed in that position, soldier and dog, handler and partner, friends who had survived war together and found each other again. Harold and Betty Thompson watched from a respectful distance, both of them wiping away tears as they witnessed a reunion 5 years in the making. "He remembers you," Betty said softly. "We always knew he was waiting for someone." The process of bringing Rex home took several weeks of paperwork, veterinary records, and arrangements for a cross-country move. But the emotional reunion had happened in that moment in the Colorado pasture, when a military working dog and his handler recognized that their partnership had survived years of separation and bureaucratic obstacles. Jake documented their reunion and the journey home on the same social media accounts he'd used to search for Rex. The videos of their first meeting, of Rex responding to commands he hadn't heard in years, and of their drive back to Texas became viral sensations that brought joy to millions of people who had followed Jake's search. But perhaps more importantly, Rex's return home began a healing process that had been interrupted 5 years earlier. For Jake, finding Rex represented more than just reuniting with a beloved animal. It represented reclaiming a part of himself that had been lost when his military service ended. Rex was my anchor during deployment, Jake explained in an interview with a veterans magazine. He reminded me every day that my job was to protect and serve, that there was always a mission to complete, always someone depending on me. When I lost track of him, I lost that sense of purpose. Rex, now living in Jake's backyard in San Antonio, seemed to understand that their reunion represented more than just a change of address. He adapted quickly to civilian life, but he also resumed many of the behaviors that had characterized their partnership in Iraq. Sleeping near Jake's bed, positioning himself to observe potential threats, and maintaining the alert, protective posture that had made him such an effective working dog. Their story inspired legislation aimed at making it easier for military working dog handlers to adopt their partners after retirement. Jake became an advocate for military working dog reunification, using his platform to help other veterans find their former partners and to educate the public about the importance of these relations and lifelines for the people who serve with them. When we deploy, they deploy. When we're in danger, they're in danger. When we come home, they should come home too. 6 months after their reunion, Jake and Rex participated in a ceremony at Lackland Air Force Base, where military working dogs received their initial training. They were honored as an example of the enduring bonds between handlers and dogs, and their story was used to inspire new handlers beginning their partnerships with military working dogs. But for Jake and Rex, the ceremony was less important than the quiet moments that had resumed in their daily life. Morning runs together, afternoon naps in the backyard, and the simple comfort of knowing that their partnership had survived war, separation, and the bureaucratic challenges that had kept them apart. People ask me what the most important moment was in my military career, Jake said during his speech at the ceremony. It wasn't any particular mission or decoration. It was the day Rex alerted me to that IED, because that's when I understood that service isn't just about individual courage. It's about the bonds we form with the people and animals who serve alongside us. He looked down at Rex, who was sitting at attention beside him, still alert and focused despite his retirement. And it was the day I found him again, because that's when I understood that those bonds don't end when the service ends. They're part of who we are forever. Jake and Rex were still inseparable. Rex had aged gracefully into his role as a civilian dog, but he maintained the dignity and alertness that had made him an exceptional military working dog. Jake had found new purpose in his advocacy work, helping other veterans navigate the process of finding and adopting their former partners. Their story had become part of the larger conversation about veteran care and the importance of recognizing that healing from military service often involves more than individual therapy. It involves maintaining the connections and relationships that sustained service members during their time in uniform. Rex taught me that coming home doesn't mean leaving everything behind. Jake reflected during a podcast interview on the 5th anniversary of their reunion. It means bringing the best parts of your service with you and finding ways to honor those experiences in civilian life. Rex, who had been napping beside Jake's chair during the interview, opened his eyes at the sound of his name, then settled back into sleep, comfortable, secure, and home. Because that's what military working dogs and their handlers understand about service. It's not just about the mission you're given, it's about the partnerships you form and the commitment to never leave anyone behind. Even if it takes 5 years, 50,000 miles, and a social media campaign that reaches millions of people. Even if it means driving across the country to a farm in Colorado and calling a name you've been hoping to say again for half a decade. Even if it means admitting that sometimes the most important victories are the personal ones, where the only people who understand the significance are a veteran and his dog, finally home together after too many years apart. Jake and Rex had served their country with distinction, but their greatest achievement was finding their way back to each other, proving that the bonds forged in service are strong enough to survive anything, including time, distance, and the challenges of a world that doesn't always understand what those bonds mean to the people who form them.